welcome to using AI to accelerate application integration. I'm going to let you know, although the safe harbor is here, this is not a product, but this is rather research and development that we're doing within Guidewire development. And it's just to show you the latest thoughts that we have. So please don't say, when is this GA, or come ask me about that afterwards. Is just to show an experimentation. This may or may not become product. My name is Brian Petrini. I'm a product manager for Guidewire. I have Vander Salamal with me, and he is one of the lead software engineers working on this. So today we're going to talk about how enterprise integration is hard. It is very hard. I was a consultant in integration for 14 years. Trust me, this is going to be challenging. We thought, how could AI help? We're going to have to go through some fundamental integration breakdown, and then we'll get to the AI program and demo. So enterprise integration is hard. You know, as I said, I'm now almost 25 years since I first started enterprise integration. And there is a lot of complexity. When you think about, the typical enterprise, you have all kinds of protocols. I've dealt with systems that went live before I was born. You have, all kinds of different data objects, complexity like an insurance of Accord. You have to worry about reliability, error handling. You have product, so in our case, Apache Camel. And then what happens if you miss something? If you miss one of those key aspects? You could have data corruption, unavailability, even security attacks. So we thought, how would an ideal integration work? Well, as I said, I was a consultant for many years. If Vander had come to me and said, Brian, I want to integrate X consumer on with Y provider on platform P middleware, can you just make it so? And then after he signed the contract and started paying me, I'd say, yes, absolutely. How could we make it so? Well, I'd go through and ask a bunch of questions and say, okay, what are you trying to do? And get to understand the requirements and the design, and then implement it. And that's what we thought that would be a great approach. So how do we make it so work? Like in Star Trek, make it so. How do I do that? Well, if you think about the general, like IEEE, computer science, software engineering book of knowledge, they have all the different methods, requirements, design, construction, testing, maintenance. There's actually a lot more, but these are the key ones. So you break it down into stages. You have a specific role working on each stage, or the primary driver for each stage. So for requirements, you have the business analysts. They are going to come up with a requirements doc. Think about this as a document. You have an integration architect. They're going to work primarily on the integration design doc. An integration developer, they're going to construct and build code. And the code is in some way a doc. It's config or a document. Then you have testing, quality assurance will work on testing, and they will go and validate that code. And then with maintenance, you're going and adding to the code. Again, back to the integration developer. So think about that, keep that in mind, that you have all of these documents. So let's take the requirement stage. You have the business analysts, they're producing a requirements doc. Ideally, the requirements are high quality and complete. So that means that the business analyst definitely got the information or the guide from the business manager and said, here's the strategy that we're going for, here's what we need to accomplish. They went and talked to the architect, and they know they know about the systems. They've talked to legal. They know that, this certain legal requirement for an area, this needs to be persisted for 7 years, all the communication. They've talked to security, and they said, here's the PII that you need to keep private and not persist unencrypted. They've talked to finance, and they know what the return on investment, they know what the budget is for this. They also are experienced enough to know what they don't know. So they know, here are the things we can't know ahead of time. I'm going to document those as risk and keep those in the requirements. And when they write the requirements document, it's correct and feasible, necessary, prioritized, unambiguous, and verifiable. In my 14 years and 65 customers in 20-some countries, I can count on one hand the number of times that happened. So if it happens, great, fantastic, you're done. You're at the end of that stage. What's likely to happen is somewhere in between. You know, you may have certainly the business manager will have given an input. They may be new to the company. They may not know even who to ask or what roles. They don't have industry experience. They don't know the unknowns. They're not familiar with the architecture. They may not even be good at writing requirements. You know, how many times have you had to go back to the business analyst and say, I don't understand what this means. How can you clarify this for me? Or they give you so many requirements and you say, which one's important? All of them. So it's not prioritized. Or they give you something and it's completely unachievable in finance. You know, I'm sorry, I would need, you know, quantum computers and fast and light technology to do all the processing that you're asking. There's going to be a lot of Star Trek references, sorry. So if that is the case, then your job or my job as an integration consultant would be to go take the requirements document that they have, and maybe it's even just a conversation, start writing things down, go to the different roles, ask them, do you have documents? Can you validate these things for me? Can you clarify it? And put together a document. It depends all on what's missing. So there are things written down to help with this, but again, it takes a lot of experience to go and say, what is missing? What do I need at the end? That is the same for design. At design, of course, it's going to be a different outcome. You're going to take the business analyst requirements doc, you're going to work with, of course, your enterprise architect and look at enterprise standards and architecture, naming standards and security and API standards, and be familiar with design patterns and bring those all together, knowing about legal and security and the integration development standards, and know, again, what you don't know. Usually when you add new integrations to an existing system, you don't know what the performance will be like. What is performance like on new load on a system? What is the response time like? You don't know. And then you'll go through, and these are very often, you know, the qualities of software, ISO 9126, functionality, reliability, integrity, usability, efficiency, security, maintainability. So you'll have a design document that has all the ilities. That's again, ideal. And you would have something, again, similar in construction. So in construction, you have the integration developer. They're, of course, working with the integration architect based on the design document. They're also working with the quality assurance on the testing. They have, you know, they know what they need to know about legal and compliance and the overall enterprise architecture, where it fits in. Again, they know what they don't know. But they have to construct code or config based on product documentation, books, articles, assets, design patterns, you know, what you see, it's Stack Overflow, and put it all together into wonderful code that is readable, maintainable, efficient, reliable, scalable, and secure. See what I mean by enterprise integration's hard? Then that was just to construction. So we thought, how can AI help? Well, we tried make it so with ChatGPT. You know, when it came out, of course, everyone was excited, and we said, oh, can we do that? Can we have ChatGPT do exactly what we just asked for? So we tried few-shot prompt engineering, which is really giving a complex prompt and say, here's the role. I want you to ask the user certain questions and to generate Apache Camel code, in our case, for running on Integration Gateway. That had limited success. So what we did find is the more specific we could be with the prompt, the better the results. So we wanted to narrow down the prompt to exactly the role, exactly the context that I'm asking. I'm in requirements and I'm asking this question, and an example output as clear as it can be. and query the LLM and said, here is what I'd like. Now, if we want to do this with integration, the challenge we have specifically in integration is, how do you know you're done? How do you know you have a good output? Well, as I said, I was an integration architect for 14 years. There's a methodology that I have around, I did with a friend and former colleague, around interface characteristics. There's actually an integration design course that we built, and it's referenced at the end of this presentation. It's all public. The interface characteristics really describe everything that you need in integration. It's all of the important characteristics of your integration that make sure that you haven't missed anything. You can think of it as an integration checklist. We also need to verify that everything is complete. Well, again, we have a set of characteristics. We can go through those and say, do we know what all these are? Are there any that are missing? But if you're not experienced, how do you know to fill it in? Because if you see a big form and you're like, what are these? Oh, well, here's a 45-page document, read it and you can understand it. That doesn't help someone who's new to the area. So can we give them a pathway? Can we guide them, especially if they're inexperienced, along that way? And then they may not have the knowledge to accomplish the task. So again, we can use an LLM to augment with the contextual information. Well, here's where you are, here's where we need you to go next. And then maybe they don't have general education. Like maybe they'll ask, well, what does idempotent mean? Well, that's one of the great things about these foundational models is that you can just query it and say, please tell me what idempotent means. As I mentioned, these are the interface characteristics. The reference at the bottom is the article. It's been out since, I think, around 2008. So we have really the functional definition, what are you doing, the technical interface, the interaction type, the performance, integrity, security, reliability, and error handling. So back to the AI, in the user conversation pattern, if I were to ask Vonder something and I said, hey, here's what I need, and Vonder will give me exactly what I need. Great. What if something is missing? What if there's an input missing? Then I would ask the question and then get a response. Say, what about this? And then he would give me an answer. But what if I'm not asking Vonder and it's someone not experienced, and then you ask the question, you get a response, and then there's some education. So you don't know. They don't know what I'm actually asking. Or can I get an example of that? Can you help define that? And then after you've educated them, then you re-ask the question and get a response. So again, going back to the possible permutations of getting to the end of a document, there's so many. It's enormous. It might even be too large to document, all the potential permutations depending on what you're doing. So really, the AI's job is to help you navigate through that, just like an experienced integration specialist. Vonder says we're trying to put Brian in a box. So to make it so. So now we're going to talk about the fundamental integration breakdown. So we have to go and give you explicit on integration. So the first thing is you need to know if someone said, hey, I want to integrate a mobile app to Claim Center, or I want to integrate, maybe a better example, an invoice system to Claim Center. Well, what does that mean? What do you do? What does integration mean? Well, it turns out that there are some atomic actions. There are really only 3 atomic consumer actions. So when I say integration, it is, you have a consumer in one application domain, you have a provider on a second application domain. They need to integrate or share data or services. And so there are 3 atomic actions. The first one is data. Simple. Get data. Well, seemingly simple. Get data. It's always a read. It's always request response. Then there's the interesting one, request action. What does request action mean? Please go do something. What is that something? We'll talk about that later. But that could be request response. That could be one way, and it's usually a change, sometimes a read. And then you have the application provider is actually a producer of notification. And so the consumer would receive that notification. Think like app events. If everything went well, then you just have the two talking to each other. If, for whatever reason, the consumer cannot consume the provider's data, actions, or notifications for various reasons. Remember, we have differences in protocols, data formats, interaction types. Any of these can be different. Then, classically, you apply enterprise integration patterns. That's on which Apache Camel is built. So you have a role of Ivan the integrator. That's actually the role that we call for integration gateway here at Guidewire. So Ivan the integrator is building an application integration. And he is resolving the differences between what the consumer needs and the provider has. All right, remember I said get data may not be so simple? Well, it is always read. Well, great, read. What can go wrong? Well, are we getting enough query? Are we getting the query information precisely enough? Are we getting too much data or not enough data? Are we getting what we want? Do we even have access to the data? What about the granularity? Can you get all that data in one call? If not, what if you need multiple calls? If you need multiple calls, are any of them related? Meaning you need a foreign key to tie them together. You need to go in a sequence. Does the data model suit our purpose? Very often, different applications have different, primary objects that they look at. What about the data? As a source you're going against, is it current? Meaning, do you have all is it up to date? Is the quality sufficient? Has the data been vetted that's in that system? Is there too much data? Maybe you get back multiple records versus a single record. What if the payload is large? You have a blob, image, etc. Same with request action. So request action actually has all of those, plus now we need to worry about what actual action. Is it the normal, create, update, delete action? Maybe you're doing an open or a close or submit. Again, the granularity. Are you talking one-to-one or is it one-to-multiple? Are you over or under fulfilling? Is there a state model? There's always a state model, but is the state model, something that the action is related to? Can the consumer participate in all the states? What does an end state look like in failure or success? What happens if the data is distributed? Now you have data in two different systems that you need to update, and you need to coordinate that. Are you able to enforce those rules? Are those rules enforced for data consistency implicitly, inherently enforced, or does the consumer need to build in that logic, that integration logic? And then lastly, for receive notification, what are the subtleties for receive notification? Well, how are you getting the receive notification? Push, pull, or pull? Does the notification have all the data or just the keys? If it has just the keys, are we going to need another atomic action like get data to actually retrieve the full data record? Is the data provided complete, or is it just the delta since the last notification? Do we need all the notifications we're receiving? Are the notifications timely? Can they be lost or duplicated? Do they arrive in order? So that was all if we can identify a single atomic action. What happens if there's multiple? What happens if you have multiple APIs or multiple systems you could have to fulfill that action? Well, then you need to go through the normal process. Think about like when you're onboarding a new provider, that you have RFI, request for information, RFP, request for proposal, sign the contract, and then onboard. Same thing with APIs. You ask for discovery. You look at all the different ones that could provide the data or service that you need. You analyze it, based on the detailed functional and non-functional requirements. You select the right one, and then you onboard them. So just to emphasize, this is experimentation, but we are looking at the first two. We are looking at requirements and design. And our architecture, again, is human in the loop. So this is to assist the human, someone who is not experienced in integration. We have a generic architecture of an input validator, database for keeping all of the history of all the requests, a vector DB, which actually we don't even need for this demo, but that would be for retrieval augmented generation. A prompt constructor, remember I said it's very important to construct exactly the right prompt for what you need. An LLM, a large language model, an API that we're querying, and an output validator. So this architecture, we imagine, would stay the same. So that would be the same architecture for both requirements and design, because remember, at the end, we are going for a document. And large language models are excellent for that. Now for the live demo.
Thank you, Brian. Hello, everyone. So now that we know all the theory, let's see it in action. What I have here is what we call IDA, or Integration Design Assistant. It's just a web application that has an AI assistant with it. And we're going to use this AI assistant to walk us through the process of analyzing an integration use case. And the scenario we'll be simulating today is about an auto repair shop. And this company used to send their invoices to an external claim system by email. They want to change that. They want to make an API call to Claim Center and send the invoice in real time. So let's begin. I have here the requirements phase, and step number 1, IDA is asking me about, can you provide more details about your integration? I would just say, I need to send an invoice to an insurance system. And I will also highlight that the persona I'm simulating here is a very inexperienced developer. So my answers will be very vague intentionally so we can see the LLM doing its job behind the scenes. So the first thing it comes back to me and says like, oh, okay, your action type is request action. And if you remember from Brian's presentation, we have 3 different types. We have get data, request action, or receive notification. And IDA, just because I said I'm sending an invoice, the LLM was able to infer that that is a request action. I'm requesting an action against an external system. And it starts step number 2, which is gather the functional requirements. It will ask me about principal data object, response object, and also are you sending invoices individually or in batches? So what I would do here is like, I would just say, I have an invoice, is that what you mean? And then IDA comes back and says, oh, invoice looks like it's your principal data object. And okay, yeah, actually, it's asking me now about details about this invoice. It's like, oh, okay, my invoice has ID, claim number, invoice number, and amount. So IDA is analyzing that. You get back to me. And you will notice that I didn't even say that invoice was my principal data object. So now it proposes a specification for this invoice. Oh, okay, does this reflect what your invoice is? So like ID, claim number, invoice number, amount, and I will confirm, yes, it does. Another thing that we'll call out here is like the user is in control of what the application is doing. We call that human in the loop. So every time the assistant will ask for confirmation, and the user is the one driving that. So, okay, great. Now let's discuss the response. Can you tell me about the response? And I would just say, I expect a response with a confirmation and also the date that the invoice was received. So it's again processing that, and it returns me with a confirmation field and also a received time field. But there's one thing that I don't like about it. Confirmation is a string. I need it to be an unknown, and I want 2 options in this unknown, like I want a success or error. So I ask for that correction. As you can see here, it changed that for me for the specification that I asked for. And then he asked me again, is this correct? So yes, it does. And the next step is it's going to ask me about, are you sending individual invoices or batches? And for this example, let's say I am sending individual invoices. So now IDA is processing all the answers I gave it, and it's going to start the next phase with the next step, which is our non-functional requirements. So let's see in a second. Another thing that it's important is like at any point in time, you can go back and make corrections. Okay, so there we go. So we have a summary of all the data we entered, and we start step number 3, gather the non-functional requirements. So it starts about asking me about performance. How quickly do you need a response? And let's say it's fine if the response comes within a minute. How many requests per period of time are you sending? I don't have that many invoices. So let's say I'm sending 10 requests per hour. And how big is your payload? I will be sending the invoice data plus a PDF attached to it. So let's say it's around 10 megabytes. Okay, it gives me a summary again about what I just entered. And then it starts step number 4, discover provider. So in this case, I know who the provider is. So it's Claim Center from Guidewire. So great, I will just enter that. But you can imagine that like at this point, the provider could be unknown, or like it could be a public provider that has public APIs. IDA would perform some web search to find out who the provider is. Or if you have within your company's intranet, a service discovery, we would plug that into IDA so that we can search for potential services that can give us an API that we can call for this use case. So it came back with an API that it found in the Claim Center documentation. And you can see here that like, oh, there is a post API that you can send the claim number. This is the request body. This is the response. Does this look correct? Let's say it does. So it's going to analyze the interface characteristics of this API now. And it's going to tell us what it knows about it and also what it doesn't know about it. So here we go. So we have the technical interface characteristics. It is telling us this API is a REST endpoint. It's a post method. Request and response are using JSON. But more importantly here, it is highlighting a bunch of things that it doesn't know about this API. So there's no information in the docs about authentication, error handling, rate limiting, idempotency, privacy. And that's great, right? Like IDA is an assistant. It is not supposed to know everything, but the moment it highlights these things, it will give the developer working on this integration a guide to use for like, I need to worry about these things. These are very important things that I need to cover as part of my integration design. So let's proceed. I will confirm that this is correct. And we are going to go to the next step, which is the onboarding with this provider. We already know who the provider is. Now, are we authorized to communicate with this provider? So no, we are not. So IDA, again, is going to the documentation of this API, and it's trying to find out information about how can we onboard with this provider. And it is telling me that, like, oh, this API requires an OAuth token. If you're using user group authentication, this is the group you need to have. If you're using service to service, this is the scope you need to have. And at this point, I'm just like, it's pretty much informational. I'm just saying, oh, that's great. You can imagine that at this point, I will be working with my IT team to get the group set up, to get the scope registered. And then it wraps up and starts step number 7, which is creating a summary of all the requirements that we gathered so far. And again, there we go. We have a summary of our functional requirements, our non-functional requirements, and also a list of risks that were identified for this integration. And again, we can go back here. For example, if there is anything that doesn't make sense, we can ask IDA like, oh, actually, I found a new document with more information. Can you consider that? And then we will redo the process and incorporate that new information, generate a new summary. So let's just confirm that this is correct so far. And it is going to wrap up what we call the requirements phase. And it is going to start the design phase now. So we have analyzed our first action. It's a request action. And now we have all the requirements. Let me generate a design specification for you. But before I do that, let me ask you a question. What is most important for you? I can generate a design to mitigate risk, but tell me, is it reliability, performance, or data integrity more important? And for this case, I would just say, we are dealing with financial transactions here, like sending invoices. So data integrity is very important. I don't want the same invoice to be processed more than once, for example. So IDA is analyzing that information all together with the previous summary that it generated for me. And it's going to give us back the design specification that we can use for this integration. So let's see what it did here. There we go. So we have a design specification that describes the systems involved in this integration, the source system, the target system. It describes their interfaces, so how they communicate, what's the payload size, is it REST, is it over JSON, like what is the flow, who initiates the transaction, what are the risks that we have here for the information that we couldn't be able to get. And data integrity, you mentioned data integrity was important, so it's highlighted here as well. And that's great, right? Like I could just stop here and then print out this specification, hand it over to the development team and let them start working. And this would be a huge value already for this team. But what about if we go one step further? I can use this specification as input for the construction phase, which is code generation. So IDA is asking me, based on these requirements above, do you want me to generate code? And I said, yes, please. So here we have a camel route, and we are forcing it in our prompt. Like we want camel code because that's the core framework used by Guidewire Integration Gateway. And it generated a route. This route has some error handling here. You can see there's an idempotent consumer based on the invoice ID. Like, again, the same invoice cannot be processed twice. It has our invoice data model here. There's a controller. There's even a test. So like it generated a test for us, a unit test. So again, you can iterate over these. It's not perfect code. There is a bunch of things you can tweak, but it's just to show how powerful this can be. Back to you, Brian.
Great. Thank you, Vander. So I want to emphasize here, you know, that again, this is not product, this is experimentation. But some people have asked, you know, if you were to go further, where might you go next? So obviously the construction was just a tease. You know, we would iterate a lot more on the requirements and design, but obviously construction and then testing and then maintenance. So, you know, generating Apache Camel in construction, generating the Apache Camel test cases, and then modifying an existing integration. And maybe, you know, someone asked, why aren't you looking at maybe just a regular co-pilot type of scenario? And my answer is pretty simple. In all my years, I never had to fly out because someone wrote bad code. I had to fly out because they wrote bad, or they used bad design to write good code. So bad design is a lot harder to fix. Code, there will be plenty of co-pilot type of applications, but we think getting the design right, you know, understanding the requirements, that is actually the most important part, because a lot of people don't realize the complexity when you don't own the integration, when you don't own the other system. You know, you're reacting to what they have, all the different APIs and interfaces. Another area, and again, this demo was just using, you know, a public LLM. It's using all public IP. So if we were to use actual Guidewire, and clearly anyone who's worked with Claim Center knows that isn't the real Claim Center API, a rather simplified one, we would need obviously a private. We'd have a vector DB. We would use, you know, RAG, retrieval augmented generation, and we would need a private LLM for that. Another interesting scenario is, you know, once we could get this going, could we go and look at actual Gosu code, you know, Gosu tests, anything, and feed that in to help reverse engineer the requirements and then go through that phase again? And I'd spent 8 years of my career on product migration with different programming models. And let me tell you, going from just code to just code without understanding the requirements and the context will never produce ideal results. It may work somewhat, but again, you have different runtime constraints, you have different product capabilities. It's better to go back and understand why. And this can assist in every single step of the way. And now, that is it for our demo and presentation. Any questions? If so,
Well, you partially answered my question. I was just curious to know, were you ever successful in being able to reverse engineer the requirements or a specification solely from Gosu code?
So the question is, were we ever able to reverse engineer the requirements? That is where we might go. We haven't actually tried that at this point. This is still in the, get the requirements. It's still in the greenfield construction phase.
I'm assuming what we have seen here is just an example for consumer, right? So you might potentially use this in case of a producer standpoint, like creating a custom cloud API or REST endpoint as well, right? Using this.
So the question was, this is from the consumer standpoint. That is our first persona. That is what we're looking for. Could it be applied to producing an API from a producer? Could it be applied to that? It certainly could. But our first focus is on the consumer. And we actually internally are even looking at this as it's called IDA, Integration Design Assistant, but really the way that we're approaching the whole design and architecture is SWEDA, Software Engineering Design Assistant. So if anyone were to look at, like could they apply this to Utro or UI for anything else? Why not? They would have to obviously plug in their specifics on here's what it takes to get to the good requirements doc. So I don't have that background. Mine is integration. That's what I'm focusing on. But the way that we're looking at the problem, it could be applied to any area of software engineering. And we think that is the unique value, because we have not seen this anywhere else. Is it all stunned silence?
Does this assume integration gateway to be available? I mean, if I'm a customer and I'm going to have my own mediation layer, will it still be helpful? Creating, say, Java code or things like that?
So the question is, would it be helpful if it's not an integration gateway? So the way that, again, this is all conceptual right now, POC, right now for our construction would be focused on integration gateway. That's where we would invest. But if we were to open it up or open source, the framework, then you could have pluggable construction. But yes, so what we would invest in would be specific for integration gateway. But even if you just stopped at the design and requirements and printed that out and handed that, that still would be good. And you could do your own, construction from that. No other questions? All right, going once, going twice. Oh, sorry, there is one.
What is the roadmap for this? How much of it is available? What is coming with Innsbruck? What is with Jasper?
Did you come in late?
I think so.
Okay, so just to clarify, this is really part of the research and development. So this is us researching. There's no promise implied otherwise of this being product. We wanted to share because we think we have a good idea and a good approach here. But so nothing is coming in Innsbruck. I'm making no promise of anything. We'll see how far we get. But you're welcome to talk to me and in a few months and see, is there any idea for that? But as of right now, no. All right, with that, so thank you very much. We appreciate you coming. There is the Guidewire developer community. Please take a look at that. There is also at the end the further reading. Remember I mentioned the interface characteristics and the integration design course. You can get those. Those are all public. It's all public material. And your opinion matters. We would very much like your opinions. If you have anything, you said, hey, I really want this. I do want you guys to make this product. Please let us know. That would be very useful. Or if you said, I'd like to see it applied in some other area. Again, any and all feedback is welcome. Thank you very much.